The alien ship appeared without warning above Earth's orbital defense station. It was nothing like the sleek vessels humans had imagined in their science fiction movies. This craft looked like a living crystal, its surface shifting between blue and silver as it moved through space. Admiral Jake Morrison stood in the command center, watching the strange vessel through the main viewing screen. "Sir, they're requesting permission to dock," said Lieutenant Carol Hayes, her fingers dancing across the communication console. "The message is coming through our diplomatic channels." Jake nodded. 3 months ago, Earth had made first contact with the Galactic Council. The meeting had been brief and formal. The aliens had seemed polite but distant, treating humanity like children who had just learned to walk. Now one of them was back, and Jake had a feeling this visit would be different. "Grant them permission to dock at Bay 7, he ordered. "And send word to Dr. Lisa Kane, tell her we have company." 20 minutes later, Jake stood in the docking bay alongside Dr. Kane, Earth's leading xenobiologist and the person who had handled most of the first contact protocols. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and graying hair, but Jake had learned not to underestimate her intelligence. The airlock hissed open, and their visitor stepped through. Jake had met aliens before, but he still found himself staring. The being stood nearly 8 feet tall, its body made of what looked like living crystal. Light moved through its transparent skin in patterns that seemed to shift with its emotions. This was Zeth Kara, an ambassador from the Lumari species. "Admiral Morrison, Dr. Kane," the alien said, its voice coming from a translation device on its chest. "I thank you for agreeing to meet with me on such short notice." "Of course," Lisa replied, stepping forward. "Though I have to admit, we're curious about the urgency of your visit." Zeth Kara's internal light flickered in what Jake had learned was a sign of stress. "I come to you with a request that may seem impossible. My people and 11 other species in the Galactic Council face complete destruction." Jake felt his blood chill. "What kind of threat are we talking about?" "The Vorthak swarm," Zeth Kara said, the lights in his body dimming. "They appeared in our galaxy 3 years ago from the dark space between galaxies. They are unlike anything we have ever encountered. They consume entire worlds, not just for resources but for the biological material of every living thing." Lisa leaned forward. "Are they a natural species or artificial?" "Both and neither," the alien replied. "They appear to be biological creatures, merged with technology in ways we cannot understand. They reproduce by consuming other life forms and incorporating their genetic material into new swarm units. Every species they devour makes them stronger and more adaptable." Jake crossed his arms. "How many worlds have they taken?" "Over 4,000 inhabited systems," Zeth Kara said quietly. "Billions of lives consumed. Entire civilizations erased from existence. They move like a plague across the galaxy, leaving nothing but empty husks of planets behind." The docking bay fell silent. Jake tried to imagine the scale of destruction the alien was describing. 4,000 systems. It was beyond human comprehension. "Why?" "Come to us?" Lisa asked. "Earth has barely been in contact with galactic civilization for 3 months. Surely there are more advanced species who could help." Zeth Kara's lights pulsed sadly. "You misunderstand, Dr. Kane. We are not asking for your help because you are advanced. We are asking because you are the last option we have left." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. "What do you mean?" "Every major military power in the galaxy has tried to stop the swarm," the alien explained. "The Vorthan Empire had the largest fleet in known space. The swarm consumed them in 6 months. The Crystalline Confederacy had weapons that could destroy stars. The swarm adapted to their technology and turned it against them. The hive worlds of Arcturus had minds that could think faster than our computers. The swarm consumed their collective intelligence and used it to become even smarter." Lisa sat down heavily in a nearby chair. "How many species are left?" 12 members of the original Galactic Council remain. Zethkara said. We estimate perhaps 50 smaller civilizations scattered throughout the galaxy. All of us are in hiding, moving from system to system, hoping the swarm does not find us. Jake began pacing the docking bay. So you come to the newest, least advanced species in the galaxy and ask us to fight this thing that destroyed civilizations millions of years older than ours? Yes, Zethkara said simply. That makes no sense, Jake replied. If they adapted to weapons that can destroy stars, what could Earth possibly offer? The aliens' lights shifted to a pattern Jake didn't recognize. Perhaps nothing. But there is something about your species that troubles me, Admiral Morrison. Something I discovered when I reviewed your planet's history files during our first contact. Lisa looked up sharply. What kind of something? Your species has a concept that does not exist among civilized galactic races, Zethkara said slowly. You call it total war. The complete mobilization of an entire civilization for the purpose of destroying an enemy. You have done this multiple times in your brief history. Jake felt his jaw tighten. He knew where this was going. The swarm adapts to advanced technology quickly, the alien continued. But your species seems to specialize in forms of conflict that more advanced civilizations abandoned long ago. Brutal, primitive methods that focus on psychological warfare and complete destruction of the enemy. You're talking about our capacity for violence, Lisa said quietly. More than that, Zethkara replied. I have studied your history. Your species fought wars where you burned entire continents to deny resources to your enemies. You created weapons designed not just to kill, but to cause maximum suffering and terror. You developed strategies based on the assumption that your enemy would do the same to you. Jake stopped pacing. You want us to be monsters. I want you to be what you already are, the alien said. The swarm operates on collective intelligence. They think as one mind across billions of bodies. They adapt quickly to logical, predictable strategies. But your species does not think logically when threatened. You become unpredictable, chaotic, willing to sacrifice everything to survive. The docking bay fell silent again. Jake could hear the hum of the station's life support systems and the distant sound of machinery. He looked at Lisa, who was staring at the floor with a troubled expression. You're asking us to save the galaxy by being the worst versions of ourselves, she said finally. I am asking you to save the galaxy by being exactly what evolution made you, Zethkara corrected. Every other species in the galaxy evolved past their primitive survival instincts. You have not. That may be the only advantage we have left, Key. Took a deep breath. What exactly are you proposing? Give us your military leaders, your strategists, your soldiers. Let them study the swarm and develop new ways to fight them. Ways that no civilized species would ever consider. And if we refuse? Zethkara's lights dimmed until his body was almost transparent. Then in perhaps 2 years, the swarm will reach your solar system, and humanity will join the billions of other species that exist now only in the swarm's collective memory. Jake looked at Lisa again. She met his eyes and nodded slowly. I'll need to speak with Earth's government, Jake said. But I think I can tell you their answer already. Which is? Jake smiled grimly. When do we start? 2 days after the meeting with Zethkara, the alien ambassador found himself in a secure briefing room deep inside the Pentagon. The walls were lined with screens showing tactical displays, historical battle maps, and classified military footage. He sat across from 5 of Earth's most senior military officers, trying to understand what he was seeing. Captain Danny Rodriguez, a veteran of 3 major conflicts, stood at the front of the room with a laser pointer in his hand. Behind him, a holographic display showed a 3-dimensional map of human military conflicts from the past century. Ambassador, you asked to understand how humans conduct warfare, Danny said. This might be disturbing for someone from a peaceful civilization. Zethkara's internal lights pulsed steadily. I must understand if I am to recommend your species to the Council. General Patricia Hall, a stern woman with silver hair and cold blue eyes, leaned forward in her chair. Then let's start with the basics. When humans go to war, we don't just fight armies, we fight entire civilizations. The holographic display shifted to show footage from World War II. Cities burning, factories exploding, civilian populations fleeing. Zethkara watched in fascination and horror as human armies systematically destroyed not just military targets, but the entire infrastructure that supported their enemies. This is total war, Patricia explained. We don't just defeat enemy soldiers. We destroy their ability to make weapons, grow food, transport supplies, communicate with each other, and maintain their government. We keep fighting until they have no choice but to surrender completely. Zethkara's lights flickered with confusion. But surely this destroys valuable resources you could use after victory. Major Chris Thompson, a special operations veteran with scars on his hands and face, laughed darkly. That's the point, Ambassador. We don't care about using enemy resources. We care about making sure they can never threaten us again. The display changed again, showing tactical simulations of modern warfare. Zethkara watched as human forces used strategies he had never imagined. They destroyed bridges to trap enemy armies, poisoned water supplies to force evacuations, and set entire forests on fire to deny cover to opposing forces. Your species fights like cornered animals, he said, not meaning it as an insult. Exactly, Danny replied, and that's what makes us effective. Most galactic species fight wars like chess games. They try to minimize damage, preserve infrastructure, avoid civilian casualties. They have rules and treaties and codes of honor. Colonel Jake Bennett, who had remained silent until now, spoke up. Humans have rules too. But when our survival is at stake, we break every rule we ever made. The holographic display showed footage from more recent conflicts: urban warfare, guerrilla tactics, psychological operations designed to break enemy morale. Zethkara saw human soldiers doing things that no civilized galactic race would ever consider. This is a recording from the Siege of Kandahar, Patricia said, highlighting a section of video. Watch how our forces adapt to enemy tactics in real time. Zethkara observed as human units faced an enemy that used civilians as shields and operated from hidden positions in urban areas. Instead of retreating or calling for backup, the human forces immediately changed their entire approach. They used sound weapons to disorient enemies, deployed smoke that revealed heat signatures, and sent small teams through sewers and tunnels to attack from unexpected directions. The enemy adapted to our initial strategy in 6 hours, Chris explained. So we developed 3 new strategies and implemented them simultaneously. By the end of the day, we were fighting with tactics we had never used before. Improvisation, Danny added. It's what humans do best. We see a problem, we find a solution, even if that solution breaks every rule of conventional warfare. The alien ambassador studied the tactical data flowing across the screens. The swarm adapts quickly to enemy strategies, but you are saying humans adapt even faster? Not faster, Patricia corrected. Differently. The swarm adapts by analyzing patterns and finding logical counters. Humans adapt by abandoning logic entirely and trying something completely unexpected. A new set of images appeared on the display. These showed human special operations forces conducting missions behind enemy lines. Zethkara watched as small teams of soldiers infiltrated hostile territory, gathered intelligence, sabotaged key installations, and escaped without being detected. This is asymmetric warfare, Jake explained. Instead of matching enemy strength with strength, we find their weaknesses and exploit them. We don't fight fair because fair fights get our people killed. The footage showed human soldiers using deception, misdirection, and psychological manipulation to achieve objectives that would have required massive conventional forces. They disguised themselves as civilians, used enemy equipment against them, and turned captured resources into weapons. Your species fights without honor, Zethkara observed. Chris grinned. Honor is for species that can afford to lose. We can't. The display changed once more, showing strategic planning sessions from various conflicts. Zethkara listened as human military leaders discussed tactics that seemed designed to cause maximum psychological damage to enemy forces. Fear is a weapon, Danny explained. If you can make your enemy afraid to fight you, you've won before the battle starts. We use reputation, propaganda, and demonstration of force to break enemy morale. Give us an example, Zethkara requested. Patricia activated a recording from a recent conflict. We were facing an enemy that had superior numbers and better equipment. Conventional tactics suggested a defensive strategy with high casualties. Instead, we did this. The footage showed a small human force conducting a nighttime raid on an enemy command post, but instead of simply destroying the facility, they left it intact while eliminating every person inside. They arranged the bodies in patterns that conveyed specific messages, left equipment that suggested capabilities the enemy hadn't known humans possessed, and disappeared without leaving any evidence of how they had infiltrated the position. The enemy found the site 12 hours later, Chris continued. Within 48 hours, 3 of their allied factions had withdrawn from the conflict. They decided that fighting humans was too dangerous. Zethkara's lights pulsed rapidly. You used fear as a strategic weapon. We used their imagination against them, Jake corrected. Humans understand that the unknown is more frightening than the known. We made them afraid of what we might do next. The alien ambassador sat quietly for several minutes, processing what he had learned. The humans waited patiently, understanding that their methods were difficult for peaceful species to comprehend. There is something else, Patricia said finally, something you need to understand about human psychology. What is that? We don't just fight to win, she explained. We fight to survive, and when human survival is threatened, we become something different, something that even we fear. The display showed historical footage from humanity's darkest conflicts. Cities reduced to rubble, entire populations displaced, landscapes transformed into hellish battlegrounds where nothing could live. This is what humans do when we believe we face extinction, Danny said quietly. We fight until either we survive or nothing else does. Zethkara stared at the images. You would destroy entire worlds to deny them to your enemies. If necessary, Patricia confirmed. The swarm consumes everything it touches, but humans would rather rule over ashes than serve as food. This is why no galactic civilization can fight the swarm effectively, Chris added. They're not willing to do what survival requires. They try to preserve their civilizations, their values, their way of life. Humans will sacrifice all of that, if it means staying alive. The alien ambassador's lights dimmed as he considered the implications. You are asking me to recommend that the galaxy unleash humanity's capacity for destruction. We're asking you to let us do what we're good at, Jake replied. The swarm has consumed every civilized response the galaxy could offer. Maybe it's time to try an uncivilized one. Zethkara stood up from his chair, his crystalline body reflecting the light from the tactical displays. I must return to the council with my recommendation. What will you tell them? Patricia asked. The alien ambassador looked around the room one final time. I will tell them that humanity represents our last hope and our greatest fear. Danny smiled grimly. Those might be the same thing, Ambassador. Yes, Zethkara replied quietly. I believe they are. The message from the Galactic Council arrived 3 weeks later. It was brief and formal, but the meaning was clear. Humanity had been granted full military authority over the galactic defense effort. Every surviving species would place their remaining forces under human command. Colonel Sam Bennett stood on the observation deck of Fort Bragg, watching as transport aircraft landed and took off in a constant stream. Each plane carried some of Earth's most elite warriors, soldiers who had been selected from thousands of volunteers. The selection process had been unlike anything in military history. "Sir, the final group from SEAL Team 6 just arrived," reported Sergeant First Class Amy Price, a Marine raider with 3 tours in hostile territories. She carried herself with the confident stride of someone who had faced death and walked. "Away," Sam nodded, checking his tablet. "That makes the count complete. 200 of the most dangerous humans on the planet." Lieutenant Commander Nick Carter approached from across the deck. His Navy SEAL team had just finished a brutal training, exercise that would have killed ordinary soldiers. "The preliminary briefings are done, Colonel. Everyone knows why they're here." "Good," Sam replied, "because what we're about to ask of them goes beyond anything in their training." The 3 of them walked toward the main briefing hall, passing groups of soldiers from every branch of the military. There were Army Rangers who had spent years fighting in the mountains of Afghanistan, Marine Force recon specialists who had conducted impossible missions in enemy territory, Air Force pararescue jumpers who had saved lives in conditions that defied survival, and Delta Force operatives whose very existence was classified. Captain Julie Martinez fell into step beside them. Her pararescue team had earned a reputation for completing missions that other units couldn't even attempt. "Colonel, I've been thinking about the enemy profile we received." "What about it?" Sam asked. "The swarm operates as a collective intelligence," she said. "They share information instantly across billions of units. That means traditional small unit tactics might not work." Major Tony Williams joined the conversation. His Army Rangers had been studying the tactical data for weeks. "Actually, I think it might work better than conventional warfare. The swarm thinks as one mind, which means they might not understand individual initiative." They entered the briefing hall, where nearly 200 of Earth's most elite soldiers waited in perfect silence. These were people who had volunteered to fight an enemy that had destroyed civilizations spanning millions of years. They sat without fidgeting, their eyes focused on the stage where their briefing would begin. Dr. Helen Brooks walked to the podium first. She was a xenobiologist who had spent her career studying alien life forms, but the Vorthak swarm was unlike anything in her research. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to tell you about the enemy you volunteered to fight." The lights dimmed, and a holographic projection filled the space above the audience. The image showed a Vorthak unit, a creature that seemed to be part insect, part machine, and part something else entirely. It stood 8 feet tall, with 4 arms ending in claws that could cut through steel. Its body was covered in biomechanical armor that shifted and adapted as they watched. "The Vorthak reproduce by consuming other life forms," Helen explained. "They break down biological material at the molecular level and incorporate useful traits into new swarm units. Every species they consume makes them stronger." Sergeant First Class Ryan Taylor, a combat engineer known for creative demolitions, raised his hand. "Doc, can they consume human biology?" "We don't know," Helen admitted. "No human has ever encountered them directly, but based on their adaptation patterns, they should be able to process any carbon-based life form." The projection changed to show tactical footage from galactic military engagements. The audience watched in grim silence as advanced alien weapons had minimal effect on swarm units. Laser cannons that could melt through battleship armor barely scorched their adaptive skin. Plasma weapons that could vaporize mountains were absorbed and redirected back at their attackers. "They adapt to energy weapons within minutes," Helen continued. "Kinetic weapons take longer, but they eventually develop armor that can deflect even railgun projectiles. Chemical weapons don't affect them at all." Corporal Kate Sullivan, a Marine with expertise in close-quarters combat, spoke up. "What about hand-to-hand fighting?" "No galactic species has attempted direct physical combat," Helen replied. "They consider it primitive and ineffective." Kate grinned. "Good thing we're primitive." Sam stepped up to the podium next. "Dr. Brooks has given you the scientific analysis. Now I'm going to give you the tactical reality. Every conventional military strategy has failed against the swarm. Every advanced weapon system has been neutralized. Every civilized approach to warfare has proven useless. He activated a new projection showing the current galactic situation. Red areas indicated swarm-controlled territory, which covered more than half the galaxy. Blue areas showed the remaining free systems, small scattered pockets hiding throughout known space. The Galactic Council is asking us to save their civilization, Sam continued, but they don't understand what that means. They want us to find a clean, efficient solution that preserves their technology and their way of life. Major Alex Turner, a strategist who had developed new urban warfare doctrines, stood up. With respect, Colonel, that's not how humans fight. Exactly, Sam replied, which is why we're going to do this our way. The projection changed again, showing Earth's military production facilities. Factories that had been retooled to produce weapons designed specifically for fighting the swarm. Unlike the energy-based systems used by galactic civilizations, these were kinetic weapons, chemical weapons, and devices based on principles that most species had abandoned thousands of years ago. We're going back to basics, Sam explained. Bullets, explosives, fire, poison, and anything else that might work against an enemy that adapts to advanced technology. Sergeant Mike Davis, a veteran of urban combat operations, raised his hand. What about support from galactic forces? They'll provide transportation, intelligence, and logistical support, Sam answered. But combat operations will be human only. The alien species can't adapt to our methods fast enough to be effective. Chief Petty Officer Diana Lee, a specialist in psychological operations, looked thoughtful. Colonel, has anyone considered that the swarm might be just as confused by our methods as our galactic allies are? That's exactly what we're counting on, Sam replied. The swarm operates on collective intelligence and logical adaptation. Human tactics are based on chaos, unpredictability, and solutions that don't make sense to anyone except the person implementing them. Lieutenant Bobby Chen, who had earned a reputation for asymmetric warfare innovations, stood up. Sir, I've been studying the swarm's behavioral patterns. They seem to prioritize efficiency and resource conservation. What if we make ourselves too expensive to consume? Sam smiled grimly. Explain. Every galactic military tries to minimize casualties and preserve resources, Bobby said, but humans are willing to trade lives for strategic advantage. If we can make every engagement cost the swarm more than they gain, their collective intelligence might decide we're not worth fighting. The room fell silent as the soldiers considered this approach. They were talking about deliberately accepting casualties to achieve psychological victory over an enemy that didn't understand the concept of acceptable losses. Captain Eddie Murphy, a demolitions expert with a talent for unconventional solutions, spoke up. There's another angle to consider. The swarm adapts by analyzing patterns and finding logical counters. What if we deliberately avoid patterns? How do you fight without tactical patterns? Asked Lieutenant Sarah Stone, an artillery specialist. By making every engagement completely different from the last one, Eddie replied. Use different weapons, different strategies, different objectives. Never repeat a successful tactic. Keep them guessing until they can't adapt fast enough to keep up. Sam looked around the room at the faces of Earth's most elite warriors. These were people who had spent their careers perfecting the art of controlled violence. Now, they were being asked to unleash that violence against an enemy that threatened the existence of every living thing in the galaxy. Ladies and gentlemen, he said finally, you've volunteered for a mission that has no precedent in human history. You're going to fight an enemy that has consumed billions of lives and destroyed thousands of civilizations. The odds of survival are essentially zero. He paused, letting that sink in. But you're also going to have the chance to do something no human has ever done before. You're going to save the galaxy, and you're going to do it by being exactly what evolution made you. Survivors who will do anything, sacrifice anything, and fight anyone to stay alive. The room erupted in grim laughter and determined nods. These were people who had joined the military knowing they might die for their country. Now they had the chance to die for something even greater. "Questions?" Sam asked. Ryan Taylor raised his hand again. "When do we leave?" "Tomorrow morning," Sam replied. "Transport ships are already waiting in orbit." Kate Sullivan grinned. "About time we showed these aliens how humans really fight." The briefing ended, but the soldiers remained in their seats, talking quietly among themselves. They were discussing tactics, sharing. Experienced Captain Roy Jackson stood on the bridge of the ESS Defiance, watching the twisted remains of what had once been a thriving star system. The Kepler 442 system had housed nearly 12 billion inhabitants across 4 worlds just 6 months ago. Now it was a graveyard of stripped planets and floating debris. "Jesus Christ," whispered Lieutenant Carol Hayes from her position at the sensor station. "What did they do to these worlds?" Dr. Helen Brooks studied the readings on her scientific instruments, her face pale with horror. "They consumed everything organic down to the bacterial level. The planets have been stripped of their atmospheres, their water, even the organic compounds in their soil." Roy gripped the armrest of his command chair tighter. He had seen war zones, devastated cities, and the aftermath of natural disasters. But this was something beyond human experience. This was the systematic erasure of entire civilizations. "Captain," called out Commander Lisa Kane from the tactical station, "we're detecting movement in the asteroid field near the 4th planet." "On screen," Roy ordered. The main viewer shifted to show a section of the asteroid belt that had once been Kepler 442. Among the floating rocks and debris, dark shapes moved with purpose. They were Vorthak bioships, creatures the size of cruisers that served as both vessels and living weapons. "How many?" Roy asked. "Sensors show at least 30. "Contacts," Lisa replied. "They appear to be conducting some kind of harvesting operation." Roy activated the ship-wide communication system. "All hands, this is the captain. We are about to make first contact with the enemy. Battle stations." The bridge transformed as crew members moved to combat positions. Red lights bathed everything in an ominous glow, and the hum of weapons systems charging filled the air. The Defiance was an experimental vessel, equipped with weapons that most galactic civilizations had abandoned centuries ago. "Captain, should we signal our presence to the swarm vessels?" asked Ensign Mark Torres from the communication station. "Negative," Roy replied. "We observe first. Learn what we can." Through the main viewer, they watched as the Vorthak bioships moved through the debris field with fluid grace. Their hulls rippled and shifted as they extended tentacle-like appendages to examine chunks of planetary material. "They're still feeding," Helen observed with disgust. "Even after consuming all life in the system, they're extracting the last traces of organic compounds from the debris." Major Karen White, leader of the Special Operations Team aboard the Defiance, joined Roy on the bridge. "Captain, my people are ready for reconnaissance if you need intelligence on those ships." "Not yet, Major," Roy replied. "First, we test their response to human weapons." He turned to Lisa. "Target the smallest bioship. Fire 1 railgun round. Center, mass." "Railgun locked on target," Lisa confirmed. "Firing." The Defiance shuddered slightly as the magnetic rails launched a tungsten projectile at a significant fraction of light speed. The kinetic round struck the Vorthak vessel amidships, punching through its biomechanical hull and erupting out the other side in a spray of alien fluids. The effect on the swarm was immediate. All 30 bioships turned toward the Defiance, with coordinated precision that spoke of their collective intelligence. Their hulls began to shift and adapt, growing thicker armor in the span of seconds. "Interesting," Helen murmured. "They're adapting to kinetic weapons much slower than they do to energy weapons." "Time to adaptation?" Roy asked. "At this rate, maybe 10 minutes before that level of armor becomes ineffective," Lisa calculated. Roy smiled grimly. "Then we better make those 10 minutes count. All weapons, free fire. Target multiple ships simultaneously. The Defiance erupted in violence as every weapon system engaged different targets. Railguns sent tungsten slugs through bioship hulls, while missile launchers fired warheads filled with white phosphorus and thermite. Chemical weapons that galactic civilizations considered barbaric struck the swarm vessels with devastating effect. The aliens had no reference for such primitive brutality. Their collective intelligence could adapt to energy weapons because it understood the physics involved. But chemical fire that burned through biomechanical armor was something their evolution had never prepared them for. "Captain," Carol called out excitedly, "the swarm ships are breaking formation. They appear to be confused by our attack patterns." Roy watched as the disciplined alien formation dissolved into chaos. Some bioships tried to close range for what appeared to be their standard boarding tactics. Others attempted to retreat to a safe distance. A few seemed to be trying both strategies simultaneously, resulting in ships that moved in contradictory directions. "Their collective intelligence is giving conflicting orders," Helen observed. "They don't know how to respond to weapons they can't quickly adapt to." Major Karen White studied the tactical display with professional interest. "Captain, I'm seeing something unusual. 3 of the damaged bioships have separated from the main group. They appear to be attempting some kind of emergency procedure." "Elaborate," Roy ordered. "It looks like they're trying to merge their biomass." "With the healthier ships," Karen explained. "Probably an attempt to share adaptation data or pool resources for survival." Roy saw an opportunity. "Lisa, target those 3 ships with high explosive rounds. Don't let them complete whatever they're doing." The Defiance's guns spoke again, sending a barrage of explosive shells into the merging bioships. The rounds detonated inside their hulls, sending fragments of alien biotechnology spinning through space. But instead of dying, the damaged vessels began to cannibalize each other, the stronger ones absorbing the biomass of the weaker. "They're learning," Helen said with alarm. "They're incorporating our damage patterns into their adaptation process." "Then we don't give them time to finish," Roy replied. "Helm, take us into close range. Prepare boarding parties." "Sir?" asked the helmsman, uncertain he had heard correctly. "You heard me," Roy confirmed. "We're going to board those ships." Major Karen White grinned fiercely. "Now you're speaking. My language, Captain." 5 minutes later, Kate Sullivan found herself floating in space outside a Vorthak bioship, surrounded by 11 other Marines in powered armor. The alien vessel was the size of a city block, its surface covered in organic-looking ridges and protrusions that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. "Remember," Karen's voice crackled through their comm systems. "No energy weapons inside the ship. The swarm adapts too quickly. Kinetic and chemical weapons only." Kate checked her assault rifle one final time. It was loaded with depleted uranium rounds and equipped with an underslung launcher for white phosphorus grenades. Weapons that any civilized galactic species would consider war crimes. "Cutting charges set," reported Corporal Jimmy Torres, the team's demolitions expert. "Breaching in 3, 2, 1. The explosive charge blew a hole in the bioship's hull, and the Marines poured through into an environment that defied human comprehension. The interior was a maze of organic corridors that seemed to breathe and pulse with their own life. The walls were covered in a substance that looked like a cross between muscle tissue and electronic circuitry. "Contact front," called out Private Mary Johnson as shapes moved in the darkness ahead. The first Vorthak drone to appear was nothing like the tactical briefings had described. It stood nearly 9 feet tall, with 4 arms ending in claws that dripped with corrosive fluids. Its head was a nightmare fusion of insect compound eyes and electronic sensors. But most disturbing was the way it moved, with jerky, uncertain motions that suggested it was receiving conflicting commands from the collective intelligence. Kate opened fire without hesitation, her depleted uranium rounds punching through the creature's biomechanical armor. The Vorthak staggered but didn't fall, its body already beginning to adapt to the kinetic impact. So she switched to her grenade launcher and put a white phosphorus round center mass. The chemical fire burned through. The alien's adaptive armor faster than its biology could compensate. The creature collapsed, writhing as the phosphorus consumed its internal systems. But even as it died, Kate could see other Vorthak drones emerging from the organic walls, their bodies already showing signs of adaptation to the chemical weapons. They're learning fast, Jimmy observed, firing a burst from his shotgun loaded with flechette rounds. But not fast enough. The Marines advanced through the bioship's corridors, fighting running battles with Vorthak drones that seemed increasingly confused by human tactics. The aliens were accustomed to facing enemies that fought with energy weapons and logical strategies. Human combat was chaos personified. "Johnson, Torres, take the left corridor," Karen ordered over the comm. "Sullivan, with me. We're heading for what looks like a command center." Kate followed Karen deeper into the bioship, past chambers filled with grotesque organic machinery and pools of fluid that might have been nutrient baths or weapon systems. The walls around them pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that seemed to be some form of communication. "Major," Kate said, studying the light patterns, "I think the ship is trying to coordinate a response to our attack." "Then we better find the brain before it figures us out," Karen replied. They reached a chamber at the heart of the bioship that defied description. It was a spherical room with no clear floor or ceiling, filled with a network of orga. Major Alex Turner stood in the war room aboard the command ship ESS Retribution, studying holographic displays that showed the current state of the galactic war. 3 months had passed since the first human victory at Kepler 442, and the conflict had evolved in ways that surprised everyone involved. "The swarm is adapting to our tactics faster than we anticipated," reported Colonel Janet Pierce, the fleet's chief intelligence officer. "But they're doing it wrong." Alex raised an eyebrow. "Explain." Janet highlighted several sectors on the galactic map. "Look at these engagement patterns. The swarm has started using more aggressive tactics, trying to overwhelm our forces with superior numbers, but they're abandoning the collective strategies that made them so effective against galactic civilizations." Sergeant Mike Davis, who had earned a reputation for close-quarters combat against Vorthak drones, joined the conversation. "The aliens are trying to fight like humans, but they don't understand what that means." "Show me," Alex ordered. The holographic display shifted to show tactical footage from recent battles. Alex watched as Vorthak bioships attempted to use what appeared to be human-inspired tactics. They spread out their formations, used hit-and-run attacks, and even attempted boarding, actions against human vessels. "They're copying our surface behaviors," observed Chief Petty Officer Diana Lee, who had been developing psychological warfare techniques. "But they don't understand the underlying principles." "Which are?" Alex asked. "Chaos," Diana replied simply. "Human tactics work because we embrace unpredictability. The swarm is trying to be unpredictable, but they're doing it systematically. They're following a pattern of unpredictability, which defeats the whole purpose." Lieutenant Bobby Chen entered the war room carrying a tablet full of data from recent engagements. "Major, I've been analyzing swarm communication intercepts. Their collective intelligence is having what can only be described as arguments." "Arguments?" Alex asked with interest. "Different parts of the swarm are developing different theories about how to fight humans," Bobby explained. "Some units think they should adapt to our weapons. Others believe they should adapt to our tactics. Still others are trying to adapt to our psychology." Alex studied the data on Bobby's tablet. "They're trying to solve 3 different problems at once." "Exactly," Bobby confirmed. "And because they share information instantly across their collective, every swarm unit is receiving conflicting directives. They're adapting in multiple directions simultaneously." Sergeant First Class Amy Price walked into the war room, still wearing combat gear from a recent ground engagement. "Major, you need to see what happened on Proxima 7. "What kind of situation?" Alex asked. "The swarm tried to use fear tactics against us," Amy replied with a grin. "They set up what looked like a torture chamber in the planetary capital, filled with the remains of the previous inhabitants. They wanted to demoralize our forces before we landed. Alex felt his blood chill. Did it work? Amy's grin widened. Not exactly. When Corporal Martinez saw what they had done, he didn't get scared. He got angry, really angry. She activated her helmet camera footage on the war room's main display. Alex watched as a human assault team discovered the Vorthak torture chamber, a grotesque display designed to break the morale of any civilized species. Instead, the humans responded with a fury that seemed to shock the swarm defenders. They used weapons and tactics that went beyond military necessity, turning the engagement into something that resembled vengeance more than warfare. The swarm doesn't understand human anger, Amy explained. They expected fear, but they got rage. Their psychological warfare backfired completely. Captain Lou Martinez appeared on the display, using a flamethrower to clear Vorthak positions with methodical precision. His face was calm, but his actions spoke of controlled fury that the aliens couldn't comprehend. Fear and anger are related emotions, Diana observed, but they produce opposite tactical responses. The swarm tried to trigger one and accidentally triggered the other. Alex turned to address the room. This gives us an opportunity. If the swarm's collective intelligence is receiving conflicting data about human psychology, we can exploit that confusion. How? Asked Janet. By being more human than they expect, Alex replied. We deliberately trigger responses they can't predict or adapt to. He moved to the holographic display and began highlighting human positions throughout the galaxy. Every engagement has been a learning experience for both sides. But we're learning faster because we don't have to share our lessons with a billion other minds that might disagree with our conclusions. Lieutenant Sarah Stone entered the war room carrying a field report from her artillery unit. Major, we just finished a bombardment of the Vorthak stronghold on Titan Base. The results were unusual. Define unusual, Alex requested. We used conventional explosives, white phosphorus, and thermite in a coordinated barrage, Sarah explained. The swarm adapted to each weapon type individually, but they couldn't adapt to all three simultaneously. She showed them sensor readings from the bombardment. Their biomechanical armor developed resistance to high explosives, then resistance to chemical fire, then resistance to thermite. But each adaptation made them more vulnerable to the other weapon types. They're trying to adapt to everything at once, Alex realized. But adaptation requires specialization. They can't be resistant to everything simultaneously. Bobby looked up from his data analysis. Major, I think I understand what's happening. The swarm's collective intelligence is designed for fighting enemies that use consistent tactics. When they encounter humans who deliberately use inconsistent tactics, their adaptation protocols create contradictory requirements. Give me an example, Alex requested. To fight human kinetic weapons, they need dense, heavy armor, Bobby explained. To fight human mobility tactics, they need to be light and fast. To fight human chemical weapons, they need sealed biosystems. But you can't be heavy and light at the same time. You can't be armored and fast simultaneously. Diana nodded in understanding. So they're adapting in circles, making themselves stronger against one threat while making themselves weaker against others. Exactly, Bobby confirmed. And because they share information instantly, every swarm unit is trying to implement all adaptations at once. Alex felt a plan forming in his mind. What if we deliberately exploit this weakness? What if we force them to adapt to contradictory requirements? How would that work? Asked Amy. Alex turned to the holographic display and began sketching out a tactical scenario. We coordinate our attacks so that different human units use completely different tactics in the same engagement, force the swarm to adapt to multiple, conflicting requirements simultaneously. Sarah studied the plan with professional interest. Artillery uses long-range bombardment, infantry uses close-quarters combat, air support uses hit-and-run tactics, and special operations uses psychological warfare, all in the same battle. The swarm's collective intelligence will try to adapt to all of them, Alex continued. But the adaptations will contradict each other. They'll make themselves weaker instead of stronger. Janet looked concerned. That's a high-risk strategy, Major. If our units aren't perfectly coordinated, we could end up in each other's way. True, Alex admitted. But humans are good at chaos. We've been practicing it for thousands of years. Captain Eddie Murphy joined the conversation from across the war room. Major, my demolitions team has been working on something that might help with this strategy. What kind of something? Alex asked. Eddie grinned. Weapons that are designed to be unpredictable. Explosives with random detonation patterns, chemical weapons that change their composition mid-flight, kinetic rounds that split into multiple projectiles at irregular intervals. Weapons that can't be adapted to because they don't follow consistent patterns, Alex realized. Exactly, Eddie confirmed. If the swarm can't predict what our weapons will do, they can't develop defenses against them. Alex looked around the war room at Earth's finest tactical minds. They were developing strategies that no galactic civilization had ever attempted. Warfare based on confusion, contradiction, and deliberate chaos. Ladies and gentlemen, he said finally, I think we've found the key to defeating the swarm. We don't just fight them with superior technology or better tactics. We fight them with superior confusion. Amy laughed. You want us to confuse them to death? In a manner of speaking, yes, Alex replied. The swarm's greatest strength is their collective intelligence and rapid adaptation. But if we can overload their adaptation protocols with contradictory requirements, their strength becomes their weakness. Bobby nodded enthusiastically. It's like a computer virus, but for biological systems. We make them adapt so much that they adapt themselves into uselessness. When do we test this theory? Asked Sarah. Alex studied the galactic map, looking for the right target. There's a major swarm concentration in the Vega system, 12 bioships and an estimated 1 million ground forces. Perfect for a large-scale test. What's the timeline? Asked Janet. We deploy in 72 hours, Alex decided. That gives us time to coordinate with all human forces in the sector and prepare our contradiction strategy. Diana smiled. The galaxy asked for salvation. They're about to get the most confusing salvation in history. Good, Alex replied. Confusion is what humans do best.